All right, good afternoon, and welcome to our breakout session on advanced functionality in our Cloud SIEM, specifically in the areas of correlation, investigation, and automated workflow. I'm Dave Frampton. I lead security solutions for Sumo, and I'll walk you through a few slides, and then we'll spend most of the time doing a pretty granular demo of a lot of the new functionality that we've been working on over the past year. Currently in beta right now, but as we get more customer experience over the course of the fall, get into next year, we'll be moving all of these features that you're about to see here to general availability. Another thing to keep in mind as you digest the material, new for some of you and maybe a little bit of an extension for others, is the vision of really integrating intelligence across security, operations, and business. And think about as you watch this, which is definitely a security context. There's a SOC analyst running through an investigation from beginning to end. Be thinking about the leverage and connections to the core platform, but also how these concepts are going to extend to operational intelligence use cases, which is our intention. So you'll see a security context today, but integrated intelligence tomorrow. Three key things that we're hoping to achieve here. In talking about the innovations in the Cloud SIEM. Number one, in the area of correlation, we're providing an extension at larger scale and better operational ease of use for how you prosecute correlation and manage events and alerts. Right? So hopefully at the end of the session you'll understand, hey, this extends what I can do in the current base platform today in that area. Second, in the area of investigation acceleration, this will be an entirely new environment within Sumo, a new style of running queries with single clicks, a lot of automated queries that go on in the back end and get summarized together to help analysts connect the dots. So accelerating that alert triage process is the second key thing that we want to cover in the demo. And then the third one, automating workflows to make the aggregate efficiency of the Security Operations Center better. So this is everything from automating actions that are taken on RuleFire, updating the states of users and entities, and automating the fetch of context and stitching it together. So hopefully by the end of the demo you'll have a clear sense of these are the type things that are going to extend the capabilities of our core Cloud SIEM. Two big problems we're trying to solve here as we go through the product and kind of workflow components here. First is the perspective of the security engineer, which is what should I prioritize and pay attention to, right? In the deluge of alerts and events and data and all of that. So there's that perspective. Some of this innovation is guided at let's focus our energy in on where we really need to pay the most attention. And then the second is once I've narrowed in on what I want to pay attention to, how do I accelerate the workflow from 30 minutes an hour for some of these alert triage workflows down into minutes? Right, because most SOCs only get to about 10% of what they need to cover. So think of these personas as you go through the story of the demo and the analyst kind of trying to solve the case. These are really the two core problems that we're trying to solve. So in terms of product componentry, I'm just going to quickly go around the circle here to tell you the components that go into this solution, partly because some of them are not as obvious in the demo. They're a little bit more subtle and a little bit in the back end. The demo is going to focus on a few a little bit more than others. So starting at the upper left, part of this move forward is to establish a new method of not only automatically parsing data ahead of time, so offloading you of that burden, but extracting insight from the data and building a relationship map in that data to enable some lightning search that we're going to show you in the demo. Information models, although not as prominent in this demo, will be a way for us to automatically normalize all of the information coming in so you can write your correlation rules and set up your alerts abstracted from the details of individual vendors and individual clouds. Our scalable lookup operator, which many of you are familiar with, is getting a complete overhaul to help it better scale to the needs of modern defense. So everything from size of table to ability to dynamically update it, stream update it. It can be very useful in tracking security state, which we'll talk about in a minute. The rules engine will be an extension of the correlation that you currently do in the search language in Sumo. right? This conditional logic, if all these things are true, then throw an alert. This will be a larger scale version of that will operate continuously, and it will let you manage content and share content much more effectively. So we'll talk about that in some more detail in the demo. The action engine will give you a much wider array of actions that you can take when a correlation rule fires. So we'll talk about that a little more as well. And then the investigation workflow will be that acceleration of connecting the dots. There's a lot in that in the demo. And then finally, to uplift the defense a little bit from the near view of the event or analyst or investigation I'm looking at, we'll be talking about tracking security state of the overall environment. So we can have a heat map of machines and users that we need to pay attention to inside our environment and outside our environment as well. So all of these pieces comprise the solution. Again, the demo is a little bit heavier on some than others. Last bit of background for those of you that aren't attending the certification tomorrow at 1 o'clock. By the way, if you have an opening there, I suggest you do. This will operate inside of Sumo on copies of the data that comes into Sumo. There'll be duplicate copies made, and this special parsing and indexing will be applied there. And then all the things you're going to see in the demo happen in that special section of Sumo. It happens completely in sync and in parallel with the base platform. So just to be clear, most workflows that we've seen in the beta process, people will pop back and forth between the core Sumo platform, looking at dashboards, running searches, and then back into this environment, back forth in order to solve their workflow. All right, so I think we're ready to queue up the demo if you want to switch over to the other machine. Apologies for the timeout on the screensaver here. All right, a couple of things before we jump into demo mode here. One is the fonts kind of compress a little bit on the screen here. So you'll see in the actual product as you play with it in your own environment that this is a little bit more readable than you'll see here. The second is that I'll go in and out of mode a little bit. We'll basically be tracing an alert from when it appears in our burn down or kind of the hot list of highest priority things to be investigated, all the way through the steps of an analyst as they bring the alert triage process to conclusion. All right, so let's get started. So what you're seeing now is this burn down queue, which is the highest priority security incidents to be investigated. This is being populated in the back end by a rules engine that's flagging notable events that meet certain criteria, whether it's thresholds or correlations. It's logging all of those notable events and then applying logic to see which of those notable events is higher priority and needs to be investigated. And you're seeing that list of the things that are high priority need to be investigated here in the burn down queue. You can see the descriptions. There's a specially summarized and parsed view of those security incidents. You can notice some of these links are clickable, and we're going to start going down that rabbit hole in a minute, but this is a difference with Core Sumo. The searches that you'll do in this environment are single click. All of this information has not only been pre-parsed, it's been pre-indexed together. And you can see some basic kind of case tracking and management. So this really is sort of the shared analyst inbox that you'll work from. So we're going to start our workflow here by highlighting a land speed violation. For those who aren't in the security industry, this just means two people logging in nearly at the same time, separated by geographic distance, which makes it impossible, so you suspect that someone's credentials have been hijacked. So we're going to open this investigation by clicking on our username jschmo here. And a couple of things to note about the environment before we put our analyst hat back on. First is what you're looking at on your right side of the screen there is the investigation tracker. So this will keep track of all the queries that you run during the course of this investigation, build them out into a tree. As you'll see, you'll be able to copy notes in, build your investigation report, customize queries. That's the investigation tracker component. And then in the middle of the screen, these are going to be your query results. And the three important things about running queries in this investigation workflow section. First is that you can see the information is organized into very intuitive categories that map to how analysts are typically trying to triangulate data across. So Am I looking at users? That'd be identity, traffic between entities, network, threat information from specific devices dedicated to throw alerts. So all of this will be organized in a way that's very intuitive for the analyst to make the triangulations they need. And then the next piece of it is that the system is running chain queries in the background. So I'll scroll down to show this a little bit more clearly. So you can see, just as a couple of examples here, the system is running through and looking for information across all the events for what you searched for, which obviously you'd expect. And then it's looking at that result, and it's looking at all of the pre-indexed fields in that result, and then running secondary queries on all of those. Right? So why do you care? Why does this matter? You can see the two events I've highlighted. This basically captures transitions in the data and gives you a little bit deeper insight. So in this case, JSchmo connected to the user JSchmo system admin, which then connected you to this IP address. Right? So it's an auto chaining of this. A lot of this is done with forward scripts that can be really hard to maintain, and it's really tough to get that insight if you don't actually know ahead of time how to write the script. And then the last piece is a lot of this information is summarized pretty densely. So you see here 7 events have been collapsed here. This just means they contain roughly the same high-level information, and the rest of it is folded down. And you can always unpack all of this all the way down even to the raw log format. But this typically will take hundreds of thousands of logs from many data sources and compress them into less than half a page. So the analyst is able to more quickly stay at a high level and come to conclusion. Okay, so back with our analyst hat on, we notice here that in the application bucket, the user JSchmo has created a user and added that user to a group. And if we unpack this, we can see scrolling down here, it looks like he's added a user to the admin group. So far we've sort of land speed violation. Now we've created another user, created admin privileges. That's suspicious enough. We're going to add it to the investigation. I'm not going to write out, but you would write notes here that would appear in your final report. In this workflow, you build your report as you go along instead of trying to remember it later. So we're going to add that to our investigation, just as a note, and then we'll come back and notice that it looks like now a new user, that new user has been created and is now stopping logging, which is another flag. So this is now raising our level of concern, so we're going to add that to the investigation workflow as well. I'll stop adding each one of these as we go because you get the point along the way. And then if we scroll down here, we can also see that this user that's been created now and logging has been disabled has now been flagged, in this case by the firewall, as communicating with a suspect IP address. So at this stage, we're starting to get the feeling that there probably is something here. Right? And we've added things to the investigation, which we would continue to do. Since we saw the original land speed violation and suspect that this may be something that affects other machines and other users, we're going to pop back to a bigger picture view to look for more insight, to see if we can find some more evidence here. So this security dashboard is similar to those that you would build in Sumo today, but because that rules engine in the back end is feeding notable events back into the log stream, you can get some more interesting views in this than you were able to previously. You can look at the total number of these notable events. How many of these were promoted to investigation? You can look at distributions of the types of rule fire. In this case, we go back looking at this geo lookup because of the original land speed violation, and we can see that JSchmo, it looks like, was the victim of a brute force login across the Japan and the US, and apologies for the difficulty reading that, especially in the back. The other important thing about the uplift in our big picture cockpit view here is this idea of tracking the security state. So here we're going to keep track of attacking systems that are outside of our environment and then internal systems that potentially are being attacked. And this leverages, as I mentioned previously, the updates to the lookup table operator. You're going to keep track of this information for our adversary systems and our target systems, but also the adversary users and target users. And this will give you a big picture view of what you should pay attention to. And obviously the fact that JSchmo appears here sort of elevates your sense of risk. In fact, you're catching up to the system because the system has already convicted both JSchmo and JSchmo's system admin account as being compromised and intruder, both. So this just gives you a sense of this type of uplift to the big picture view that, that you can get. So pulling back over to our investigation, at this stage there's several different paths you could go down, but we're going to go follow up and run a follow-on query on the JSchmo system admin. This is the account that was created here. You can notice on the right side here we're starting to keep track of the queries that we run. In this case we can notice here that it looks like Palo Alto Firewall is not the only source that thinks this IP is bad. It looks like Sumo's internal CrowdStrike is convinced that this is bad as well, so we'll note that, add that to the investigation. And then we come down here in the identity factor and we notice that there's two other IP addresses, or two other users rather, that look like they may be associated with this IP address. So we probably add that to the investigation. Maybe there's been some lateral movement, we don't know, but at least both these users were connected through the chaining in the system to this IP address. So now we're going to take a look at that IP address because we wonder, hey, are there other users that maybe contacted it that weren't captured in this first sweep? So we're going to shift click here, and this just shows you another facility in the system. You can go out to external systems to check virus total, DShield threat crowd, or you can do what we're going to do here, which is customize a query. We're going to look over a little bit longer time range. We're going to look at maybe 3 days ago to now and check and see if there are any other users that were associated with this IP address. So we come down here, check the identity. It doesn't really look like much, so as the analyst often does, he's ruling things out as well as ruling things in. Next piece of this is we're just going to run down to finish up the investigation these two users. And here, this is something that's quite common in the early use of the product. People use this tree structure on the right to sort of create the logical view of what they're doing. So we actually just went back one to retrace our steps. We went after the IP address. Now we're going to go over the two users, and you're going to see the leaves build out on this tree here as we go. So we're going to go down and find Stefan, our user, and you can notice there's a little bit of a sliding glitch in the UI there. But you can notice that second leaf built out on the tree over there on the right-hand side. And just to speed up the flow here, it looks like we find that there's suspected malware, so we'll add that to our investigation, go back here, and then take a look at the last user. This gives you a flavor of the workflow here. To close this out, it looks like this last user, looks like we have some high volume traffic that's been flagged in our threat as being suspected of communicating with pastebin, which for those outside of security is a common place where data exfiltration is done due to anonymity. So you can see how like all these different factors and the groupings and some of this chaining help the analyst connect these dots relatively quickly. At this point we would close the investigation. There's not really, we'd actually keep going deeper, but we're going to close it, just show you what that process is like. You're going to recommend an action, you're going to assign a priority, and then what will happen is a report will be generated that will show you a completed version of here that enables you to take a timeline view of what happened, a logical view of what happened, and then recreate sort of the logical tree that is quite useful in audit, training, and demonstrating what you ruled in and what you ruled out. So with that analyst hat, we'll take that off for a minute and go back to the very beginning of our story here and look at the population of the burn down queue originally. Remember I mentioned the rules engine's creating these notable events, and then as evidence builds, it elevates the severity and populates this. Just to give you a flavor for what the rules engine looks like underneath, to contrast it with the correlate by query, we're going to go into our rules library here. And we're going to look at just some super simple rules to get across a couple of the basic concepts here. First one is a brute force login. It's a super simple logic in the filter stage. Just says, hey, we're looking for login failure. We want to look for 5 of these in a 10-minute period. And we want to aggregate this to only get an alert once an hour, so we're not flooding the alert inbox. And then we're going to create a notable event of mild severity here. But we'll create a notable event and put that into the log stream. Notice the action engine I mentioned on the earlier slide there are a whole series of events, and you can do any number of these in parallel. You can update a lookup table, you can create an investigation, you can obviously send out email, Slack notifications, customize that using named actions. So this just gives you a basic flavor for how a rule is constructed here. And then just to show the last aspect of this, which is more important for the scale of the system, this is a rule that shows a successful login after a brute force login. So here you're establishing the condition that, hey, there's a successful login and that the other rule has fired, and you want to make sure that this is for the same user and within the same time frame. So this gives you an idea of the kind of stacked nature of these rules and the power of that in terms of not having to write so many different safe search alerts. You can start creating routes that then more efficiently scale out the number of correlation conditions you can cover. And then just the last thing to show here, in multiple actions, we're creating a notable event, obviously of higher severity here, but we're also creating a notable event to update the security state that we talked about earlier. We're elevating from just unsuspected to suspected. We're also elevating the attack lifecycle here from this is not just basic recon, we think we're now in the delivery phase here. All right, and the last step here before we zoom back out is, as you'll find in the system, if you went back through this as an expert user, you would actually find in the alert factor type a good number of the steps that I talked about that were actually already auto-summarized and concluded for you. You wouldn't find the lateral infection spread to the other two users. And this just shows the power of stacking those notable events, cross-referencing them, and surfacing them and summarizing them whenever they have common touch points. So the whole point here is to try to get that alert triage down to minutes instead of having to spend so much time going to different systems and triangulating across the different pieces. All right, could you head back to the slides for a minute? Okay. Two last quick ones to finish on here, because it was a little hard to see in the demo for sure. This tracking of security state that's done in the new lookup tables, these are kind of the categorizations of our adversaries. You start at an unknown and then progress up to intruder, and then targets inside your environment, start at good and then progress up to compromise. The important thing about this is that it dramatically reduces the noise of your correlations, because you can set correlations that are only applicable when the state has been elevated to 2 or 3, which is a great way to minimize the noise and focus the attention of your analyst. And then finally, in the back end of the system, we're tracking the state of the aggregate attack lifecycle. This is sort of a MITRE-inspired framework that lets us look at what's happening before the attack, what stage we think it's at, what activities during the attack we think we've observed, and then finally what we can conclude about the objectives of the attack, which is greatly useful in helping zero in not only on what to pay attention to, but then how to summarize that and coordinate the broader resources of the defense. So hopefully this is a little bit of a drive-by demo, but hopefully it's given you a sense of the 3 key innovations that we're bringing to the Cloud SIEM to sort of uplift and scale the defense. Correlation, we talked about the rules engine, putting notable events back in the the event stream, talked about improvements in alerting, large-scale rules deployment, out-of-the-box content for that. We talked about the new environment, single-click searches, hundreds of chain queries coming back and summarized to help the analyst conclude more rapidly, and then all the automation of different actions that you can take, automated fetch of information across different systems, the automation of the tracking of the aggregate defense. So I really appreciate everybody hanging in for the granular demo. I also want to thank everybody. I see many faces in the audience who have helped us in the design partnership phase of a lot of this functionality and are going to help us get this over the line to GA. So really appreciate all the energy there. For those who want to find out more, there are 3 customers who've had early exposure to this who are going to be having sessions following this one in the course of this afternoon, and then a panel with those customers tomorrow, I believe around 12:30. So I really appreciate all your time. Enjoy the rest of the event.